Hello everyone. Today we shall be learning about billionaires from an economic perspective. What we shall be discussing is, are billionaires a good sign or a bad sign for the economy? And why do we get such a wide gap between rich and poor? And is it good for the economy? The main points of this presentation are going to be, are billionaires good or bad for the economy? Why do we get so many billionaires? Or for that matter, why do we have such a wide gap between rich and normal or poor people in the economy? And is it good? Before we start, we'll have a brief context of the modern monetary setup where we'll discuss how money is created and grow in the economy. Under this system, let's see how money is created in the economy. A person goes to the bank to get some loan. Now the bank takes from the person a collateral, which can be an asset, inventory, and in lieu of that, the bank grants him a loan. And voila, money is created in the economy. Because as the name suggests in this system, credit is money. Now let's see how the money flows in the system and how it benefits the risk taker. First of all, understand this, that this person A has got the money first in his hand. The bank has created the money out of thin air and given to person A. He has that money to buy an array of things first. Now, using that money, he invests in a business. He starts a factory. Also, using that money, he invests in some real estate, buys in some houses. Remember, the buyers right now in the economy are the risk takers, not the common people. Then he uses that money to give in to the salaries of his employees. Now comes the masses. Now comes the money in their hands. Using that money, now let's call the masses, in this case, the person B. Using that money, he buys some products from the market. He also invests the money in, let's say, first of all, real estate. However, the market has already been bought to some extent by the risk takers already, and hence the prices of real estate have risen for the masses. Also, using that money, he saves and invests in equities, which means the money in turn, some of that money in turn goes back to the factory of person A. And so he gets a further reward. So remember, getting the money first is very important and very crucial. And so in turn, getting the money first and as we'll see later on, some inflation are the rewards in the economy for a risk taker. And this is what pushes him ahead of the common masses in the economy, thus raising the gap between the rich and poor. So is this right? Isn't this process unfair, as some may ask? The answer is no. This process is absolutely correct, and this is the way, and this is what the free markets are all about. Rewarding risk takers exponentially if their risk turns out to be correct. That's the nature of free markets. What's wrong, however, and where the problems comes in, is when the cycle turns and the risk taker makes a bad decision. By turning of cycle, I mean, let's say when the demand of that product falls, or the risk taker in turn himself makes a bad decision. That's when the creative destruction forces in the free market would have ensured mean reversion, or in other words, the rewards that the risk taker would have got thanks to the free markets would have been reversed under this process. It would have been cleansed out. However, if the government and the central banks intervene at that point and ensures that he's saved from this, that's when the problem comes in, because this means socializing of losses while privatizing of profits, which is bad for the right functioning of free markets. This permanently increases the gap between rich and poor and ensures this gap rises in an unnatural fashion. This is incentivizing the crony capitalism while at the same time disincentivizing risk taking in the economy, the real risk taking. So let's see how and why the government or central bank intervene in the free markets, and what should be done instead to prevent future socializing of losses, or at least discourage them, and permanently increasing the gap between the rich and poor against the forces of free markets. We'll start with seeing first how the money grows in the system or in the economy. Now let's see how the money grows in the system. So the person who has taken the loan from the bank invests in his business, and his business luckily grows. Now the person sees future demand and he approaches the bank for more loan. The bank, since the business already has grown and the person has a bigger collateral to offer, the banks give him a bigger loan, and voila, more money is created in the economy. But now comes the problem in the form of inflation. How? Let's see. Now, the person has taken loan from the bank. This time he also invests in business. However, this time, because of some external circumstances or due to his own wrong decisions, the business turns out bad, a malinvestment. Or the person wrongly speculates in the real estate market. He invests money in the real estate. Or worse, he just spends it on himself. In all three scenarios, the goods or services are not created as they should have been in the economy. However, we do have credit or money supply that has already been created in the economy. So, the economy has more money supply than goods and services, and due to this mismatch, inflation happens. Let's look at the second scenario. This time again, the person either invests his money in the business, which unfortunately doesn't grow. He invests the money in real estate, which, luck good for him, rises in price. This asset price rise. In both circumstances, he approaches the bank for more loan. The bank grants them a bigger loan in both cases. This, at least in the former case, is known as what we call evergreening of loan. What happens is, with this bigger loan, the person pays back to the bank the old loan, and the remaining money he uses either, let's say, for putting up his old business on road, investing again more in the real estate market, or the third scenario that we just saw, investing or spending the money on himself. In all cases, again, the required goods and services are not produced, but more credit is created in the economy, leading again to more inflation. Now, what happens to credit that was generated by the bank and was causing inflation? Now, so let's say the business or the person has failed, and even now the evergreening of loans that was happening for him has stopped. The asset market that was growing has collapsed. He has no money no longer to invest further. And in third case, anyways, he has wasted money. spend on himself. Now a bank is asking for their loan back, but he has no money to return. Then what happens? So here's what happens when he has no money to return. The banks would take over the factory, or for that matter any asset of that person, into their custody and sell it over to a third party. So in effect, wealth is being transferred from person A to person B. During this transfer, there will be some credit destroyed in the economy, as the market value or the value at which the bank sell over the asset to the third party will not exactly be the market value. And so hence some deflationary pressures would be put on the economy, with leading to some slowdown. Let's say the second scenario. In this case, even the collateral value is insufficient for the banks to recover the loans. Then what happens? Enter the investors. They will start losing money. How? Well, because here the bank has to issue more equity, or in some cases debt also, to raise the money to cover its losses in the balance sheet. That means more credit destruction takes place, and this can lead to a bigger economic slowdown. And now the third scenario. In this scenario, even the equity value of the bank is not sufficient to cover its losses. In this case, the federal government has to step in. They have to buy equity into the banks. And how would they do that? Well, they would use the taxpayers' money to do that. They would use the taxpayers' money to buy equity into the banks. Hence, as they are shifting wealth from the taxpayers and buying equity into the bank, this will lead to a lower demand in the economy and hence a lower slowdown. Also, since they're using taxpayers' money to buy equity into the bank, it's very important that punitive actions are taken against people who are responsible for this mess. Otherwise, this phenomenon will repeat itself. And why the intervention of federal government is required? Because otherwise we are in for a fourth scenario, which is a bigger mess. And that is, in this case, the depositors, or in other words, the common people, would lose money. This would mean the banks have to write off large amounts of loans from their balance sheets, causing enormous deflationary pressures on the economy and an eventual economic crash. So now, since the government has intervened and saved the banks and even some companies from falling apart, but what happens if instead of taking punitive actions, the government, even after its intervention, the management of those companies and banks remain the same? That's when the problem occurs. The risk takers, who must have been economically obliterated, still remain in the system to take another chance. This means it removes the opportunity and space for new participants to come in, take their places, and get a shot. That is what the actual free market creative destruction process ensures, which is now removed because of government intervention without any punitive actions. Thus, this ensures the gap between the rich and poor that was growing, and it was fine. It was part of the free market enterprise. This gap will remain in perpetuity between the same participants, by the way, and widens with very limited chance for others to come in and join. It rather becomes a more and more exclusive club. So in conclusion, getting money first and inflation, some inflation, are reasons why risk takers do better on an average and exponentially better at times in a free market setup, and this is perfectly fine. Billionaires and the wide difference in wealth between rich or risk takers and normal people is a natural outcome of free markets, and in fact is a good sign the free markets are working fine. So this ensures actually a healthy risk taking, as it will incentivize the people to join in and take some risks to get those rewards. However, like every free market phenomenon, this too has an enshrined mean reversion process ensured by the creative destruction forces of not letting the gap between the risk takers and normal people increase in perpetuity and wider, and also giving others a chance to join this, which, however, as we saw in the slides before, if interfered due to government and central banks intervention without punitive actions, leads to a disruption of those free market forces and a permanent ever increasing gap between rich and the poor, which is what is really wrong. So, in case the government or central banks, as we saw in the previous slides, have to intervene for the larger objectives, which is essentially saving the economy from collapsing, it has to also ensure that punitive actions is taken against those people responsible for those crony behavior, so that in the future it disincentivizes that kind of behavior by the market participants. So thank you very much for watching the presentation. Do subscribe if you like such content and comment in case of any queries. Thanks a lot.